Welcome to tonight's program, a Gap Year 101 webinar. This is a recorded session that you will receive a link to after the event. However, if you're joining us now, you'll have the opportunity to post questions to our fantastic Gap Year consultant at the end. My name is Ashley Williams, and as the USA Gap Year Fairs Outreach Coordinator, I want to extend a huge thank you for spending your evening with us. A little bit about who's speaking to you. As an international education professional, I have had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the transformative power of Gap Year experiences. Having been part of our past 2 annual Gap Year Fair Scholarship winners' journeys, I had the honor of presenting each one of them with a giant $5,000 check. This year, I was fortunate enough to experience a Gap Year program myself by doing a site visit with Spanish Gap Year, where I immersed myself in a Basque cooking class and traditional pottery making. This experience only reinforced my belief in the immense value of experiential learning and the importance of taking time to explore the world around us. As someone who has studied abroad during their college years, I can attest to the life-changing impact that these experiences can have on one's personal and professional growth. Before we get started, I just wanted to note that this information session is a part of USA Gap Year Fairs, which is powered by GoOverseas.com. GoOverseas is a community-centered resource for all different types of travel experiences. You can think of us like Yelp, but for meaningful travel programs. You can visit GoOverseas to read verified alumni reviews, find programs, browse articles, guides, and learn about scholarship opportunities, including the $5,000 Gap Year Scholarship that closes March 15th. If all of the Gap opportunities available make your head spin, we recommend you start with our Gap Matcher. This customizable quiz can help you find your top programs to consider based on your interests. Every year, GoOverseas offers a Gap Year Tuition Scholarship. Keep an eye out for this email announcement soon, but this is a $5,000 scholarship that goes towards a Gap Year Fair provider's Gap Year program. We have so much fun awarding the winner every year. Additionally, we have our in-person USA Gap Year Fairs, which are coming to 30 communities around the United States. If any of these upcoming events are near you, we highly recommend that you sign up and join dozens of Gap Year programs from around the world to continue the conversation. If any of these programs are not too close to you, you can also attend one of our other virtual Gap Year sessions. We are so excited to have Julia here today to talk about Gap Year planning and Gap Year 101. And at our other events, we will have other Gap Year Fair consultants covering the same topic. So if you miss anything in this webinar or you don't get the chance to ask all of the questions you wanted to, please tune in for one of those additional events. So now I'm very excited to welcome Julia, our keynote speaker and Gap Year expert for the event. Julia has had more than a decade of experience as a Gap Year expert matching young adults for programs of their dreams. Julia is also a member of the Gap Year Association's Board of Directors and head of the Outreach Committee. To give you a schedule overview, Julia will give you a thorough overview of the Gap Year option for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we should have about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A. Thanks again and enjoy. Pass this over to you, Julia.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here, especially because this is kind of the first event that's going to unfurl this, 2024 Gap Year season. I've been on the road with the Gap Year Fairs for, I want to say, at least 8 or 9 years now, and it's a wonderful series. So if you do have the opportunity to go to an in-person fair, that's a really exciting opportunity. But let's talk about Gap Years for tonight so that you're all ready to go when it does come time to make these decisions about the Gap Year option. I'm here talking to you tonight because I am a professional Gap Year counselor. Yes, people like us exist. We are kind of like the realtors of the Gap Year world, or if you're familiar with, independent educational consultants, that's kind of a little bit like what I do, except I only deal with Gap Year opportunities. So my role with students is to help them craft personalized itineraries that sometimes consist of structured opportunities like the ones we'll talk about tonight, or that you might see at a fair, and also things that students just dream up on their own that I get to help them plan and execute, which is just the most fun, and it's a wonderful job. Physically, I'm based in Stowe, Vermont, where I get to ski and snowboard and enjoy all the outdoor opportunities. And I also, of course, love to travel. My own business started 15 years ago after my own gap year, which is the top picture in the slide. I spent almost a year in Tanzania doing public health work with a nonprofit. And when I came back from that experience, I thought, wow, what if I had done that before college? Everything would have been different. And since then, I've made it my mission to help educate and inspire more and more people to take gap years. So that's a little bit about me. But let's talk more about gap years themselves, because that's the good stuff of what you're all here for. So I always like to start with a working definition of what is a gap year. Now, a gap year is meant to have a bit of a bandwidth around it, right? You want it to have these parameters, but also a lot of opportunity for a student to co-create the opportunity themselves. So this is the definition that we use as an industry. A gap year is an intentional period of time devoted to personal growth and exploration through experiential learning opportunities. And moreover, it's really a time to focus on what I call the 3 Ps, which is personal, practical, and professional growth or development. So the personal things are things that you do for yourself because you love theater and you want to make sure you act on your gap year. The practical stuff is the adulting skills, like learning how to drive or learning how to cook or do your laundry or budget, or all of those things that you kind of need to learn to thrive in adulthood. And then the professional opportunities on a gap year could be anything around career exploration and resume building, so that when you enter college or the workforce, you are more prepared to know what you like to do and to make better decisions about your future because of this period of time. So as you can see, it's really time on. It is an intentional choice rather than the lack of a choice. So when you're thinking about a gap year, you really should be thinking about it as this opportunity to really level up yourself and who you want to be as an adult. It's such an amazing opportunity. Now, a lot of people, for the past few years, I should say, we were talking about the gap year as kind of the antidote to the pandemic. And a lot of the students who are considering gap time nowadays still were really affected by those COVID lockdown times, when you were doing online schooling and not able to socialize and do the extracurriculars that you might have done. But also, I think that the most common thing that I am hearing now from this year's high school seniors and juniors is that they're just a little confused as to what they want after high school. They don't know what type of higher education might be best for them. They don't know what they want to do as a career, and they think they should know. And I think that our society has done a real disservice to young people by making them think that they should know what they want to do or what they want to be when they grow up. So I think that maybe this is a meme. I didn't create this image or this concept, but it's one that I think is really illustrative of why a gap year can be so beneficial, not just for the hard skills that you gain, but for the perspective on life that you gain. Because a lot of times you graduate high school and you think life is that straight line. But guess what? It is not. Life is a series of twists and turns. And what if we gave all of our young people the opportunity to buffer themselves, to gain confidence and a broader worldview, so that not only they know that life is these squiggly lines, but also, the younger in life that you can discover what you're good at and your strengths and what you want to put your energy towards in that internal motivation. That is what can determine how, you define your own success and how you leverage that in the world. So, a gap year is not just a splash and giggle where you go and surf for a year and just like have a good time. It really is meant to be this rite of passage into adulthood that allows you to understand what you want to do, or at least what you want to work towards as you kind of move into adulthood, because we don't have it all figured out, even the big kids, right? So what we see with gap year students once they take gap time is some pretty incredible benefits. So if the analogies before didn't work for you, if you're more of a data person, then these are the data slides for you. So when we've done alumni surveys, and by we, I mean the gap year industry as a whole, the Gap Year Association, which is the industry governing body of the gap year movement, they've done these huge alumni surveys where they take 5,000 people's opinions about their gap time and, crinkle the data into these wonderful slides for us. And what they have found is that 98% of students say that their gap year helped improve their maturity and confidence. 98% say that they developed more intercultural competency as a result of their gap year. and 82% say that they got a competitive edge when applying to jobs and internships in college as a result of their gap time. These are just 3 cherry-picked data points that I like to share, but I think that the other huge thing that that survey told us was 95% of students say that their gap year helped set them up for success in their next step. Didn't matter what that next step was. Could have been community college, 4-year college, the workforce, whatever it was, they felt more prepared for it. And I think that is one of the most compelling pieces of data that I know about. Now, the other thing is that we see that students who want to go to college, want to go to a 4-year school, they still go to a 4-year school after their gap time. Our best data says about 90% of students start college within a year of taking their gap time. So it's not common for students to just kind of get a whole new idea about their life. If they wanted to go to college before, they tend to want to go to college after their gap time. And once they get there, they actually have higher GPAs and graduate sooner than traditional students. And that's according to studies from UNC Chapel Hill and Middlebury College. So it's once students kind of know why they're at college, they can perform better and engage in the studies in a new way. So that's why we see students really embracing their college experience after the gap time. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to integrate the college application process and that kind of stuff into the gap year experience if that's what you're planning on doing. So when you're getting into the brass tacks of planning a gap year, these are the 4 things that I want you to be thinking about as you start your research. First of all, you showed up tonight, so that is the first step, right? Is getting information. This is a huge research undertaking. So thinking about what you want to get out of it and then what opportunities are out there is really the first step. So when you are, as a family, are discussing the gap year option, one of the things that you're going to be talking about is the parameters. And that's one of the first things. So this is when a family sits around the dinner table and says, okay, what is the budget that we're talking about? Jimmy, what do you want out of your gap time? What are your dreams for your gap time? Me as a parent, here are my thoughts about where I would support you going, what types of opportunities I could financially support you going to, what are my hard stops, and really laying that all out so that a student can feel empowered to make decisions within what the family knows is acceptable. So really having those conversations transparently at the beginning of planning can be very helpful so that there's not family tension around what a student might be planning or thinking. Also, parents do need to kind of accept that some of this is going to be uncomfortable for you too, because this is a fledging of a young adult. So some of the stuff that they might want to do might seem impossible to you as a parent, but they may be able to evolve towards that goal. So that's another thing that we can talk about in the Q&A if you want to, because that has to do with progression. So what a student might be ready to do when they graduate high school on day 1 is going to be different from what they can do March or April of their gap time. So when you're thinking about structuring a gap year, you do want to buffer it so that the more structured experiences, the ones that offer more support, more mentorship, those tend to want to happen towards the beginning of the gap time, either in the summer or fall of a gap year experience. And then a gap year can build in more independence and more adventure or more geographic range as the gap year progresses. Geography-wise, a gap year can really happen anywhere, including, close to home, virtually, and across the world. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But those geographical parameters are something that a student should really start jotting down as far as where you might want to go, what languages you speak or want to learn, where you might have family or friends that you might be able to stay with, those kinds of things. And then the anchors. These are the things I mentioned before: personal, practical, professional. If you can think of 2 or 3 things in each of those categories to use as your anchors, that will help you research programs, because you can look on the internet and Google, gap year program, and a lot of great opportunities are going to come up, but they might not be the right things for you. Whereas if you're like, I like martial arts and I want to learn Thai, and I also love sea turtles. Well, guess what? Like, you could go to Thailand and practice Muay Thai and do a sea turtle conservation program, but that just requires you to sit down and think through really what those parameters and goals and anchors are for yourself. So speaking of where in the world, sometimes people think that they need to fling themselves, super far away from home to have a meaningful gap year, and that's just not the case at all. In fact, most students will kind of block out their gap year into seasons or phases, and some of those are going to be at home, where you can make money, where you can engage in opportunities that are, localized, which is really cost effective and can be really a good growth experience. So a lot of times students will be at home after graduation and through the summer, earning money, preparing for their gap time. Maybe they'll continue that, or maybe they'll go away from home in the fall. And then sometimes students want to return home for the holidays and maybe work over the winter a little bit and then go off again in the spring and summer to do something else. So where that something else is really depends on the individual, but you can find many, many US based programs and opportunities here in our own country, as well as, the world is our oyster again, which is wonderful because I wasn't saying that, 2 or 3 years ago, but where your family feels comfortable traveling is going to be a more personal conversation for each family. But as far as, where you can do volunteer and travel and interning opportunities is really, really vast. So that's pretty exciting. Now, the types of opportunities are really different as well. Now, as part of your gap year education, I'm hoping to open your mind a little bit as far as the types of opportunities that are out there. Again, sometimes when you start Googling gap year programs, you start seeing a lot of the more structured opportunities that you see in this top row. But the bottom row is also a really important category to consider as well, because what we're seeing is a lot of students wanting to self-design their own experiences, meaning that they're not doing a program at all, but they are creating their own experience. Now, that's going to take a student who has a lot of internal motivation and a lot of, ability to kind of self-regulate in some of these opportunities, but a lot of times they're very cost effective as well. So when we talk about types of programs, we're talking about programs that have usually a cost associated with them, but with that you get learning, mentorship, more structured opportunities in whatever category we're talking about. So we have experiential semesters where you might be traveling with a group and exploring a different country or region, usually guided through an activity or theme. So you might be doing, rock climbing and whitewater rafting in the US, or you might be doing language learning in Ecuador, or you might be doing art history exploration in Europe. So those are very popular, especially for a first opportunity for gap year students. We also have volunteering, which are, serving a community. It could be conservation volunteering, could be working with in teaching English or working as a classroom assistant, could be working with animals. There's so many great volunteer opportunities in the US and abroad. There's also enrichment courses where you can learn a skill or deepen a skill. So if you really love ceramics, maybe you go to France and take a ceramics class and practice your French. It's possible. It's done all the time. Or maybe you want to get your PADI scuba certification, or learn how to surf, or take a coding class in which you kind of learn a new coding language. All of those things are great gap year opportunities. There's also national service, which is kind of AmeriCorps, which is the domestic arm of the Peace Corps, has many opportunities that gap year students qualify for. So the easiest way to describe this is that it's usually 6 to 10 month long opportunities, and you can learn more about them by, Googling AmeriCorps and gap year, and then a bunch of the different opportunities will come up that you might qualify for as a high school graduate. And lastly, we have interning, which, sometimes when you think of interning, you think of something that you have to set up yourself in your own town or through a family or friend contact. But there's actually internship programs abroad where you can live in an apartment and get an internship placement in an industry that's interesting to you and live with other peers. And it's really amazing to get that kind of resume building experience on your gap year. So those are all kind of the types of programs that you might find. And a lot of those types of programs are going to be listed on Go Overseas as well. So if you start getting, if you're, if you start getting like, your spidey sense starts tingling on one of these options, like start doing some research. And the bottom self-designed opportunities are really going to be ones, like I said, that are a little bit more malleable, flexible, that can kind of be created as you want. So traveling, meaning, you get a Eurail pass or you backpack through Southeast Asia for a week or more or 2 weeks. I have a student this year who's backpacking his entire gap year. Local opportunities, not just, working, but you can also volunteer intern locally as well. You can also do destination work where you actually earn money, but you're not living at home. So for example, going to work at a ski resort and living in the employee housing and getting to ski and also earn money. Personal projects. So I had a student who a few years ago wrote a one-woman show and produced it and acted it out, which is, such an amazing experience to have at 18 years old. So if there's something in you that you really want to accomplish on your gap year, this is such an amazing time to take that opportunity. And lastly, there's work exchange. And this has become increasingly popular as well, where you can actually go and join a platform, like for example, Workaway, and you get matched with hosts who have maybe farms or hostels or other types of placements where you can just work in exchange for your room and board. So that's another cost-effective and independent way of traveling all over the world. So as you can see, this is so much information, but also I hope that it expands your brain into what the possibilities could look like for gap years. So to further kind of illustrate this point, I just want to go through quickly a couple student profiles, just to kind of reiterate how these different students made their gap years happen in the flow of a year. So Elsa did an experiential semester in the fall of her gap year after working at home over the summer. She came home for the holidays, and then she went around February. She went to Costa Rica for 6 weeks, did an outdoor expedition where she was hiking through the jungle and learning how to whitewater raft and rappel down waterfalls and things like that. And then she ended her year by doing some conservation volunteering. She was like pulling invasive weeds and building fences and things like that on public lands in Australia. And then she went over to New Zealand and backpacked around New Zealand for a few weeks with a friend. So, this is a great example of a student who really built towards independence by starting with an experiential semester that was highly supported. And then as her year went on, ended with backpacking in Australia and New Zealand, which is a more independent activity. Andre is an awesome student. He was a guest on a podcast that I host called Gap Year Radio, and he chose to serve with City Year, which is an AmeriCorps program. He served 10 months in New Orleans, which is his hometown. So one of the reasons I love highlighting Andre is because he chose to have a local gap year, but he was not working in his, own community. He was working, a neighborhood over from where he grew up. So it was a slightly different experience than it was growing up where he grew up. So I think that that's a really important point too, is that because our nation's cities are so diverse and have so many different, subcultures and things like that, you can really have a different experience by, exploring your own hometown. And that's what Andre did. And he had a really powerful experience working with City Year. He was actually tutoring underserved youth in the school system, trying to keep youth in school and increase literacy rates. So really amazing program. Now, Michelle is a great example of someone who self-funded her gap year. So she said, I'm taking a gap year, and her parents said, that's wonderful. Like, we support you, but we want you to pay for it. So she started saving money really early for her gap year experiences. And then she made it work financially by choosing lower cost opportunities, getting some travel grants, and then, just kind of hustling a little bit too on her, saving money herself and putting it towards her gap year. But she spent 3 months in Guatemala after the summer. This was in the fall of her gap time. She spent 3 months at a language school. She really wanted to learn Spanish and increase her proficiency. So that did that. And she had an amazing homestay family that she got to know really well. Came home for the holidays and then went off to Mexico for 5 months in a microfinance internship with a women's microfinance organization in Oaxaca, Mexico. Where she really got to use that Spanish because she was doing transcribing. She was interviewing women about what they were using their microloans for. Amazing experience. And then she ended by traveling for 2 months on her own in Colombia and Peru. So she's kind of my hero. But I also think that this is a great example of an adventure that you can have as a gap year student with a little bit of foresight and good planning. So a word about the college experience and how that dovetails into planning a gap year. So a lot of students, if they are college bound, will apply to college senior year and then request a deferral from their school of choice. That allows you to take your gap year without needing to apply to college on your gap year. So that's a really popular route for a lot of students if you feel like you can make the decision about where you want to go to school without having had your gap year. Since the pandemic, I would say that about half of the students I work with now apply to college on their gap year because they're using their gap year to figure out where they want to go to college. So that is totally possible as well. It does require a little bit more, time during your gap year to dedicate to those applications and really crossing the T's and dotting the I's, but it is possible. If you would like to know what colleges allow deferrals or what deferral policies look like, you can check out the Gap Year Association's website. They have a great deferral policy list from different universities. It's not totally comprehensive, but it's a great starting point. You can also call the admissions office for any college and just say, hey, what's your gap year deferral policy? They'll answer. And then with scholarships and FAFSA, obviously there's a lot of new things going on with financial aid this year, But generally speaking, what you do is you apply for financial aid the year before you go to school. So that would be during your gap year as a gap year student. Now, with in-house scholarships and financial aid, sometimes packages will defer with your admission if you choose to defer your college. Other times you might have to reapply and get a new package. So that can sometimes be a bit of a roll of the dice. It really goes institution to institution. So I'm speaking in very general terms, but these are just things to kind of keep in mind as you're talking about gap year and college kind of making sense together. But there are a lot of colleges allow deferrals because they like gap year students. They recognize that they're more mature, more ready to be there. And so a lot of colleges, especially private schools and the four-year public universities really are gap year friendly, as we say. So this is my last slide, and then we can kind of open the door to questions. But I love kind of sharing the resources that, we've already mentioned. Go Overseas is amazing. Gap Year Association, in addition to that deferral policy list, has a lot of other resources as well. They have gap year stories on their website of different profiles of different gap year students. They have different program listings, especially accredited programs that they've accredited themselves, and loads of other planning resources and things like that. You can also find my radio podcast that I co-host with my friend Margot. Anywhere you find your favorite podcast, we like to interview gap year alums and experts just to kind of help people demystify the gap year option. And of course, I am available everywhere. I encourage you to find me on social media. If you are on social media, I update things all the time with new advice and what's going on with me and my students. I also offer free brainstorming conversations, especially if you're a senior. So if you're a senior and really getting serious about gap year planning, want to share ideas and want to, talk through things, those are completely complimentary. And I also have a full suite of kind of, one-on-one packages for counseling services that are on offer for anyone who needs that extra support as well. So with that, I think I'll throw it back to my background crew here to kind of let me know what I need to answer question-wise.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Julia. That was
Sure, I'll stop the share too, but if I can always drop those resources in the chat if we need to.
okay, lovely. So now that we're gonna transition over to our Q&A portion of the event. And now is a great time to throw in any questions you may have in the chat while you may be thinking of one. I have one right off the cuff for you, Julia. It's a quick question that I hear from time to time, and that is, what if my student doesn't want to go to college, or if they feel like a year isn't enough or adversely too long? How do we navigate those changes and make sure that they're prepared and ready to start back up again?
Yeah, well, I think that one thing that we're seeing in this generation of students is people wanting to be very intentional about their higher education choices. And I think that rather than a student kind of starting college and flailing and wasting a bunch of money, not being ready, the fact that a student says, hey, like, I don't want to go to college right now, can actually be to their benefit. So I think that this is a situation in which a gap year can be a very important tool in making sure that they're being intentional about their next choices. So if a family says, or if a student says, I don't want to go to college, I want to take a gap year, that can be great as long as that gap year is a plan of action. So if that's, working something that is interesting to them, if that is, some of these travel and self-discovery opportunities that help them understand what types of things they might want to do, a lot of times what students need is the spark. And so the more you see and the more you do in the world, the more you can figure out like what your lane is. So I think that it's okay for a student not to know that they want to go to college, but I think that working together as a family to create a really solid plan that's buffered with intention and purpose can be very effective.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer to that. Thank you so much. And I'm pulling a question here from Becky in the chat. She's wondering what sort of programs can be paid for by their college fund, and how do they look for that info?
Oh, that is such a good question. And, I wanted to be really mindful of time, so I didn't dive too much into 529 funds, but this is an excellent way to fund gap year opportunities. So basically, if anybody out there has, a college savings plan that's tax advantaged, you can often use those funds towards gap year programs. So typically what the IRS wants you to do is make sure that any gap year program that you would consider using these funds for is accredited through, an official institution as recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. So, for example, there are many gap year programs that have a relationship. I'll use one for example, Knowles, which is the National Outdoor Leadership School. They're an outdoor education program, but they also have an accrediting body. So that means that they can offer college credit through some of their longer programs, which is awesome because that means that it can unlock those funds. You can route them through the college, the accrediting college, and then they pay for some or all of the program fee. Um, a quick way to know if a program does this is that on the Gap Year Association website, all of the accredited programs, full accredited programs, all can get college credit through Portland State University. So that's a real easy button, kind of one to peruse there.
Thank you. Another question we have is from Kabir. How do I tell my college that I want to take a gap year? Follow-up question to that is, how is it best to ask for a deferral once you get into college?
Such a good question. So in the front end, when you're doing your exploratory research, you can kind of, I would say if you have like a spreadsheet or something like that, adding like a column, gap year friendly or deferral policy column, and just kind of starting to populate any college that you're considering with what, if they're accepting of gap years or not, is kind of good so that you're prepared once you start getting your acceptances. You don't need to be shy about asking the admissions office what their gap year policy is. However, most colleges don't want to know that you're considering a gap year until you're already in. So it's kind of this weird, I don't know, tete-a-tete where you're just, not really saying you're holding your cards a little close to your vest. But then once you get into a college, then that's when you ask for your deferral. And every college has a slightly different policy, but typically what you do is put down a deposit at your school. So that's usually a couple $100s to kind of hold your place. And then you write your proposal, which is usually in the form of a deferral letter. And this is a letter to your admissions contact saying, hi, I'm Julia. I'm taking a gap year. I think it's going to be good for me because here's what I plan to do. And I can't wait to start as the class of XYZ next class year. So you basically create this, you know, it's like a letter form of a PowerPoint presentation where you're just like, this is why I think you should let me take a gap year. So that's what most colleges want to see. And then they rubber stamp it and hold your spot for the following year.
Wonderful. And then I believe our last question we have so far, unless anybody else wants to submit into the chat, we have, what if you've already graduated from college, are you eligible to take a gap year?
Could you repeat that for me, Ashley? Sorry.
Sure. If you've already graduated from college, are you eligible for gap years?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, so yes. So the idea of taking a gap year, while in the context of this presentation, I mostly talked about it as something that you might do before higher education. A gap year can really be at any time in life. It's most typically taken, in a moment of transition. So after college is actually a perfect time to take gap year. That's actually when I took my gap year. And I found it to be a really awesome way to launch me into my career. Not just because my career ended up being in the gap year space, but it was incredibly formative. So I would say that there's no wrong time to take a gap year. Also, if you are in college and you're struggling, if you don't feel like you're in the right school or you're not making the most of your college experience, there's so many students who take a step away and they might take a semester or year off of school and experience different gap year programs or opportunities and then re-engage with college and finish up. So I think that that's a really good plan too. So yes, you can take a gap year after college.
So to kind of follow up with that, can you take a gap year in the middle of college?
Well, yes, kind of just spoke to that idea, but I think that like we kind of, it operates similarly, but the motivations are sometimes different because if you're taking gap time in the middle of college, it's typically because you're not satisfied with something about your college experience. So sometimes students will want to explore careers in a more serious way during a college gap, or they might be looking for community that they haven't found at college and stuff like that.
Thank you. We have we have about 3 more questions that have been asked in the chat. PK would like to have you speak on language immersion programs.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great type of category. I kind of put that in that bucket of, experiential semester or experiential programming that we talked about in the slide of different types of opportunities. So language immersion programs can kind of take different forms. Some, I'll just use Spanish as an example, but you might go to, Peru and, be with a group of 12 or 15 other gap year students and living in homestay families and having language school every day, and then excursions where you get to deepen your language. And that's more of a structured date, opportunity where everybody's there for the same amount of time. But there's also language schools where you can go to these more flexible types of institutions where you just go and you can spend a week at a language school, or you could spend 6 months at a language school. So those tend to be a little bit more independent. You have people kind of coming and going. People tend to be a wider age range, not just gappers, but people could be, taking a career break or other types of situations. So there's language immersion programs all over the world. There's also ones that are more focused on service or volunteering as well. So language is such a great thing to focus on during gap time.
Yeah, that is what I would do if I had gap time right now.
Which
So,
language would you want to learn?
I learned Spanish in high school, and I learned French when I was studying abroad in college.
Nice.
I would love to return to my French because if you don't use it, you lose it, sort of a thing.
Yep, I hear you.
Okay, we have another question, additional question. What could a gap year look like between undergrad and grad school?
Oh, that's a great question. So a lot of times it depends on what type of grad school we're talking about and how intense your grad school opportunity might be. So I know that a lot of students will, if they, for example, get into med school, so they're in and they've deferred, they might use their gap year as a bit of a rest year, knowing that they're going to be going into a very intense learning experience. Other times, students use a post-college gap year to figure out if they want to go to grad school. So I had a student last year actually who was in that exact position. She was a neuroscience major at Brown, and she took a gap year to kind of figure out her life and whether she wanted to go to medical school. And she ended up doing a bunch of different things, including trekking in Nepal and getting a yoga teacher certification and interning in Cape Town, South Africa. And she came away from that experience saying, actually, I don't want to go to med school. And I'm so glad that I did not put myself through that application process and starting that experience, because that's actually not what I want. So when we think about these experiences informing our future, learning about what you don't want can be just as important as learning about what you do want. So I think that was a really amazing revelation for her to experience.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah. We have another question here from Kay Frost. Can you speak to how a student can best utilize the remainder of their given time, given that the new year, if they haven't optimized their time from the onset?
Totally. Yeah, this is not uncommon. Sometimes students don't exactly know what they want from their gap year, and their fall is a little bit lackluster, and that's totally fine, because sometimes a gap year can kind of be, sometimes use the Harry Potter reference, like the room of requirement. It sometimes is, sometimes you need a lackluster fall to spur someone into action, into more exciting or interesting opportunities in the new year. So I would say that over the next 3 weeks, kind of what we have left of this calendar year, can be a really good time to kind of do a little bit of self-inventory for that student. So say, what have I done this year? What do I want to do? Because there is still so much time left in the gap year. From January through June, July, August, that is a lot of time that you can have some amazing experiences. So I would say, like, thinking about those goals and opportunities that could be kind of put into the new year energy, and then starting to, research and implement that, because there are lots of programs that have start dates in February and March, and even some in January, that you can still onboard to no problem.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Kay Frost. What wisdom can you provide on taking classes, passion or otherwise, during the deferral year, and how it may affect the deferring college acceptance negatively or positively?
This is a really important question because, again, because things are changing in the higher ed landscape so much, especially post-pandemic, colleges are getting really strict about how many credits you can have taken before you become a transfer student rather than an incoming freshman. So this has all sorts of implications. So it's really important to know, if you are going to a certain college, what is in that deferral policy, because some colleges will say you can take X number of credits and we're happy about it. Other colleges will say, we expect you to take no credit on your gap year, don't even try. So I would say that that's part of the wisdom. But then I think that the other wisdom is about discovering what you're interested in. And for some students, taking a class here or there and kind of testing the waters and getting some gen eds out of the way can be a really nice gateway into kind of a longer college experience, or kind of having a better sense of what they might want to study as their major or potential career path. So I think that there is kind of a couple things to consider with that question. But I also think that knowing yourself or your student is really important, because some students learn best experientially. So if this particular student hasn't discovered what they love to do in the classroom environment, thinking through some experiential opportunities through internships or hands-on learning and that kind of stuff can potentially be really exciting and inspiring for them too.
Thank you. We have another question from Farah. How are safety concerns addressed during a gap year, particularly overseas?
Yes. In the industry, we refer to safety as risk management. And that's because, when it comes down to it, there is safety issues all around us, even just walking down the street in our hometowns. So when we're talking about managing for risk, we think about the individual person who's going to be traveling and what types of structure and support they need in a situation where they're outside of their bubble, outside of their comfort zone. So for some students, maybe students who've traveled during their summers, or who've been, taken road trips with friends by the time high school is over, there might be students who have a lot of independence and a lot of good decision-making capability under their belt already as gap year students. They are going to have a different risk calculation than a student who is a risk taker, who likes to jump off cliffs into water and stuff like that. And so those students, the students who are a little bit risk taker, leaning, can benefit from programs that offer more structure and support. Not that they need to be suffocated by any means, but just, for example, I had a student a few years ago who wanted to just travel all over the world, and he wanted to do all these especially outdoor expeditions. He wanted to go through hiking and backpacking and whitewater rafting. He had never done those things, so he doesn't know how to manage his risk in the backcountry. And so I sent him on an outdoor educator course where he got to learn how to do that through the tutelage of an instructor, and learn how to do that safely and ethically in the outdoors. And then he went off and did those things on his own. And he's since become quite an accomplished outdoors person. So I think that that's one way to manage risk, is to know the student and understand what types of support they need when they're traveling. And also thinking about the progression thing that we talked about earlier, of giving students more ability to flex that independence as the gap year goes on. And then the other thing is choosing opportunities that have a really good safety record, that have good risk management in place. And so that's a research undertaking for the student and their family to kind of look for the certain, I would say, measures that are in place to mitigate risks, like knowing what to do in the event of a natural disaster or political upheaval, understanding what their protocols are for minor or major injuries, those kinds of things. If a program is Gap Year Association accredited, they have gone through a very extensive vetting to look at those policies. So that's another kind of way to understand what those policies could look like in practice. It's a little bit of a long answer, but a big question.
Thank you. A second question from Farah is, what is an approach to building a gap year that you can use to build your resume?
Oh, that's such a good question too. So I think that, one thing that I think we should think about with a gap year is again, with the individual, and kind of thinking about how can they maximize their future through their gap time. So if a student says, I have a student this year who says that he really wants to build his resume and he's really serious about it. And what he means by that is not only jumpstarting his career exploration through his gap year, but he also wants to kind of be able to, I think, go into summer opportunities and things like that with things like meaty things on his resume. So I would say that interning and doing internship programs is probably one of the best ways a student can do that, because a lot of times interning internationally and using these programs can really get a student some high quality experience that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get in the American setting, just because of our economy and how our internships work, and the kind of hierarchy of who gets really good internships. You usually have to have some college under your belt. So I would say that's a really good way to build a resume. But then I think that also what tends to happen with gap year students is that they come off as more confident and more self-possessed as a result of their gap time. So when we're talking about building a resume, if we're talking about being more attractive in the job market, a gap year's soft skills building is going to be just as important. So when you're thinking about what a student needs, if they need like more socialization skills, or they need to build that confidence, or they need public speaking, opportunities, that can be a really good way to build their resume too.
Thank you. Well, you're going to do one more question since we're at time. We have from K Frost. In the light of pandemic being in the rearview mirror, what countries or parts of the world are proving most successful or popular and still provide opportunity through the risk management lens?
Oh, K Frost is using my own language back at me. I love that. Thank you. So let's see. Some really popular places for my gap year students include Costa Rica is a really good one. Costa Rica is great because you can practice Spanish. It's a politically stable country. It's easy to travel around through public transport. There's loads of opportunities, both volunteering and language learning and those kinds of things, as well as adventure travel, all sorts of stuff in Costa Rica. So that's a really good one. Europe is becoming increasingly popular, I think, since the pandemic. So Western Europe, especially. So Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, the UK, and Ireland. Those are great places to spend gap time, and the language learning that can happen in some of those countries is really wonderful as well. South Africa is actually a really popular country. I would say that, gosh, probably 15 to 20% of my students go to South Africa at some point during their gap time, either to volunteer or intern or travel. And so that's not always the most obvious choice, but it is a place where you can do wildlife volunteering. Cape Town, South Africa is a, metropolis that has loads of different interning opportunities, and lots of also volunteer opportunities in communities as well. So that one is very popular. Thailand and Southeast Asia continue to be very popular. And Fiji is popular, and then Australia and New Zealand are also really popular. So yeah, in this post-pandemic world, it's hard to choose, but I would say those tend to be some places that have none of those places are without risk, but I would say that risk can be managed in those places pretty well.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for those awesome questions. And thank you, Julia, for the wonderful presentation. You're making me want to take a gap year now.
Well, I'm sure that you just working in the space wants to make you take a gap year every moment of the day, right?
Definitely. If anybody has any more questions for Julia, we'll send her contact information along with this recording for you to follow up. And with that, that concludes our webinar for the evening. So
Thanks
thank
to
you.
everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. And yeah, if I missed any of your questions, please shoot me an email. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.